We're going to have David Wood come up, and he's an awesome man of God. If you guys don't know, he's one of the illest apologists. He told me to say that. He's one of the illest apologists out there. And Vocab told me to say that he's hurting for some views on YouTube. So if you guys could subscribe to his YouTube channel, Acts 17 Apologetics on YouTube, go ahead and do so. Give him some love. Give him some views now. But make some noise for him. He's going to come up here. He's going to share his testimony with us. Subscribe to his channels. He's one of the biggest apologists out there. So if everybody can give a round of applause for David Wood. Let's hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I was joking when I said to introduce me as the illest apologist. He said, how should I introduce you? I should just tell him I'm the illest. And anyway, he did it. He rolled with it. So I heard Pastor Gabe say he wants to do this every year, and that would be awesome. That would be awesome, because this is where apologetics needs to be. And too many people in our generation when we think of apologetics, we think of something that like William Lane Craig or James White do, on a college campus, on a stage, or in a debate, or something like that. When if you look at it, that is certainly a kind of apologetics, but the command directed towards Christians to be apologists is in 1 Peter 3:15. And that's written by Peter. He's a fisherman, right? That is not some great scholar. And he's writing to Christians in general, not saying, hey, you professional apologists who, you do this all your life. He's writing to Christians in general. Christians in general are to be apologists. So if you think of what apologetics would have looked like during that time, Peter telling Christians in 1 Peter 3:15 that they need to always be prepared to give a defense, and that's where we get our word apologetics. It's apologia there. So then in its original context, that referred to it was a term used in court when you had charges brought against you. The defense would stand up and give the apologia, which was the defense, to show that you're innocent of these charges. And so Peter uses that to say, if people are saying, hey, why do you have this hope? Why do you have this hope in Jesus Christ? Then he said, be prepared to give an answer. And so that is apologetics. So notice that would have been all Christians during that time. And when you were being challenged, hey, why do you believe in this Christian stuff? Why do you believe in this Christianity nonsense? Why do you believe in Jesus when that's silly? These are conversations and discussions you would have gotten into in your daily interactions with your friends and coworkers and so on. So that's where apologetics needs to be. That's where it started at. And so awesome to have something like this every year. Now I'm going to share a bit of my story, and I actually don't like sharing my story, not because it's embarrassing. I embarrass myself on a daily basis. I have no problem embarrassing myself. But early on, when I started sharing my story, I would have people come up to me afterwards, after I spoke, and they would say, wow, it's an awesome testimony, man. I don't really have a testimony because, I just basically grew up in a good Christian household, and, I've always been in church, and I've always served God. And I would go, you've always served God, and you think you don't have a testimony? That's the testimony that's amazing to me. When I was, all the Christians I knew when I became a Christian were Christians who had done horrible things. So that just seemed normal, right? It seemed normal to become a Christian after doing horrible things. What was impressive is people who hadn't done those kinds of things. Any idiot can fall down a hill, right? You know what I mean? That's just gravity. That's easy. You just fall down a hill and keep falling and falling and falling. So it's always weird to say, man, I just fell down a hill for like 3 hours. And it's like, well, so what, right? You climb up the hill. That's impressive, right? So anyway, anyway, there's been a tendency in churches to say, look how bad I was, and then I became a Christian and so on. But apologetics did play an important role in why I became a Christian. So relevant to kick off an apologetics conference. My journey began when I was 5 years old, and one of my early memories, and not many people can say, hey, I got this thing started when I was 5, but I was 5 years old and living with my mom and her boyfriend, and I had this little raggedy dog, mutt named Goliath. And I'd had it as long as I can remember. I had this dog. We'd go walking through the woods together and so on. And one day my mom got a phone call and I heard her on the phone, and she starts crying, and she turns to me, and she's got tears in her eyes, and she turns and she says, she tells me that Goliath has been run over by a bus and killed. And so I'm looking at her, and I thought, so what, it's just a dog. And, but she was crying, and so I couldn't figure out why it bothered her that my dog, which she hated, was dead. It seemed strange to me. I thought there was something wrong with my mom. And so as time went on, other things would happen, and I would see that other people get upset when something dies. And never made any sense to me. I was always thinking, why are you crying over your pet dying? Why are you crying over your relative dying? Did you think that person was going to live forever? So it was like it was spreading, right? Whatever this problem people have is, it was spreading. People tend to get upset over things happening that they should know are obviously going to happen. Eventually, years later, my best friend, when I was growing up, he died parasailing. The whole time we were growing up, he always talked about wanting to go parasailing. And he finally got his chance to go parasailing. He jumped, and he had his harness broke, he plummeted to his death. And I went over to his house because I thought he was going to be back from his trip and so on, and that's when I found out that he had died. And I remember walking away from there and thinking to myself, hey, I'm having the same reaction I always have when like a pet or something dies, namely nothing. There's just it was obviously going to happen sooner or later. But there was weird because I started thinking like, well, that should be bothering me. My best friend dying should be bothering me somehow. It should be affecting me somehow. And so then I started thinking very briefly that there's something wrong with me, that I'm not reacting like other people react, but I should there. Now, there's a reason I wasn't reacting in the same way other people react. I didn't find out until years later. The psychiatrist diagnosed me with antisocial personality disorder. That's what psychopaths have, right? They don't have normal emotional attachments to other people. And so they don't have remorse when they do something horrible. They don't feel bad about it. They don't feel bad when people die and things like that. So, but if you're growing up, you don't know that you have a problem. You don't know that you have a problem that lots of other people have, and that psychologists know exactly what the problem is and why it happens and so on. You don't know any of that. All you know is your experience, and hey, I'm different from other people. So you have to try and understand that. And one of the problems is people don't always catch on to problems that psychopaths have, because psychopaths learn to act like other people, right? You just say, okay, everyone's really upset that this person died, so let me hold my head down, even though you don't care at all. And even when they start catching on that something might be weird, you can usually talk your way out of it. I remember I was in 9th grade, and I would finish my classwork early, and so I would just draw pictures or something like that. And anyway, I was drawing a picture of me massacring several other students, right? And so they're all sitting there with X's for eyes, and I killed them all. I get called to the counselor's office, and the counselor's office, well, your teacher's a little bit disturbed by this picture of you slaughtering several of your classmates. And I was like, nah, I'm just joking, come on, I was bored. And she's like, oh, okay, well, that's fine, so just don't do that anymore. And I'm like, are you serious? You're letting me out of your office with that? So you just go on, and you actually never get diagnosed with anything, and you're left to figure things out on your own. And so in my late teens, I started thinking that I had figured things out. Figured out why I was different from everyone else. And what I concluded was that, things evolve and things change over time. And eventually, new organisms take over, and they can outcompete the older ones because the older ones are somehow inferior. They don't survive and reproduce as well. And so I concluded that I'm actually a higher stage of evolution, right? I'm a new version of humanity, because you look around, you see people crying and miserable over all these things, and they feel bad when they do something, and I just never do, and I don't have those feelings. And so it occurred to me, hey, those emotions, they may have helped humanity for a while, but now a new stage of humanity is coming along, not governed by logic, not governed by these kinds of problems, just governed by pure reason and logic and so on. And so, no, notice that is completely insane, right? Everything I just said is completely insane, but it made absolute perfect sense to me. So, one of the defining moments during this time was one night I'd broken into a store, and I was running from police. They were on my tail, and I was running down some railroad tracks from the police. And so I had police behind me, and then there's a hill beside me, and police are coming down the hill as well. And then they get in front of me, so I'm surrounded on three sides. And the fourth side is the Monongahela River, which is a pretty decent-sized river. And so I jumped in and swam across, and got to the other side, and somehow beat the police to the other side, but was working my way up the hill on the other side to get out of there as quickly as I could. And I emerged from a patch of woods on the other side, and I found myself in someone's backyard. And in front of me was this beautiful, awesome garden. So there's the garden, and then the person's house on the other side of that, and I have to keep going that way because the police are that way. So I start to walk around the garden, and as I start to walk around the garden, I pause to philosophize, and start thinking to myself, wait a minute, why am I walking around this person's garden? Like, why am I being courteous? I don't care about the people in that house. I certainly don't care about their vegetables. Why am I being courteous by walking around? And so, as I marched my way through that garden, instead of going around it, I got this overwhelming sense of freedom, right? Because the reason I was walking around the garden is I'd just been told all my life, hey, here's how you have to respect other people's property and so on, when it didn't make sense according to my beliefs. So I just marched through the garden. I got this rush of freedom, like, it has finally hit me that I don't have to follow the same rules that other people have to follow. If I'm the new stage of humanity, why am I going to be at all concerned about other people's property or anything like this? So that was a changing point, and basically after that, I just kept getting worse and worse and worse, because once you get that feeling of freedom, and it comes from doing the opposite of what you've been told, then you keep going a little further. So a couple years later, I ended up. Long story short, we'll skip to the end. I see we've got some young people here. It's kind of PG-13. Keep it PG-13. I eventually tried to kill my dad with a hammer, and it wasn't for anything. It was mainly it was like my final break with everything I had been taught. I'd been doing everything I could, like everything anyone had ever told me I had to do. I was bent on doing the exact opposite of what I was told, and every time I did it, I felt like I was somehow stripping off something that, like, I'd been brainwashed by these people to tell me what to do. So I keep doing worse and worse things. Eventually, tried to kill my dad with a hammer. I hit him about 7 or 8 times in the head, left him for dead, and then I got in my truck and started driving to some other relative's house. And a little after that, I got put into a mental hospital. That's where they diagnosed me as a psychopath. And eventually, after that, went to jail. And so I was in jail for a while, and in different places, and they would send me back to another psychiatric hospital and so on, but going back and forth there. And in jail, eventually was in a dorm. And I was there in a dorm. One day there was a Christian named Randy who came in there. And Randy, the Christian, was locked up for turning himself in for 21 felonies. So this is a guy who'd done all kinds of things growing up, became a Christian, and went and confessed to everything he'd ever done, and turned himself in. And so anyway, I was an atheist, just so you know. But I found that interesting, right? I'm like, wow, that's kind of really stupid, but that's kind of interesting, right? He's an interesting fellow. Things would be going on. There'd be a fight in the dorm, which is like our only form of entertainment in there. And I would go up to Randy and I'd say, hey, you see that fight? And he'd go, nope. I'd turn my head away. I was praying that it would stop. I'm like, what? What else have you got to do in here? So this was Randy. And one day I walked up to Randy and I gave him, started sharing my beliefs with him. So my belief was basically, you've got this giant universe, right? I mean, think about how vast this universe is. billions and billions of galaxies, and then our Milky Way galaxy is only one tiny galaxy among all these other galaxies, and then our sun is just one little tiny speck in this giant galaxy, and then our planet is one little pathetic piece of dust going around that, and then there are these little blobs of molecules, these little blobs of cells going around that planet, thinking that what we do is so important. So if you think about it in those terms, nothing we really do matters. You could kill 1 million people, it doesn't matter. You could spend your life helping people, it doesn't really matter. It's all irrelevant as far as the universe is concerned. So Randy was sitting there reading his Bible, and I walked up to him and I said, hey, you know why you're reading your Bible? You're reading your Bible because you were born in the United States. If you've been born anywhere else, you believe in something else. If you've been born in China, you'd be a Buddhist. If you've been born in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you've been born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim. Because people like you believe whatever you were taught to believe. And why that was profoundly stupid was I had certain beliefs that other people didn't have, like that I'm the highest stage of humanity and so on. But as far as my beliefs about the universe and how it got here and how life got here, that was just stuff that I'd heard from in class, in my science classes and so on. I believed, it never crossed my mind to go out and examine these things. So point is, the things that I believed them because I was taught these things, because I was born in a certain place and time. When I'm pointing a finger at a Christian and saying, haha, you just believe what you're told to believe. I believed what I was told to believe. Anyway, never sunk in. But something interesting happened when I started talking to Randy, started criticizing Randy. Randy started fighting back. And that was the first Christian I'd ever seen who started standing his ground. Every other Christian that I'd ever known in school, when I would start saying, I would just say things like, okay, so you believe in God, I'll tell you what, here's a pencil, tell God to move the pencil, I'll believe in God. Okay, I'm waiting. Oh, guess what? I can move it. I can move it. Am I more powerful than your God? And so on. And they just wouldn't want to argue, right? So they would, okay, all right, you're not interested in talking. So that's how it would happen all my life. And Randy was different. He would start challenging the claims I was making, and usually just by questioning things and asking me why I believed whatever I was saying and how I came to that conclusion and so on. And so he would basically just keep asking me questions, and I would realize I actually had no clue why I believed some of the things that I was claiming, and no one had ever pointed it out to me. But actually became friends with Randy. We would have lots of discussions. It would really bother me that he would win arguments, because keep in mind, I believe I'm the new stage of human evolution. I'm the highest there is now. And here's, of all people, a Christian of all people, would be defeating me in arguments. It's totally humiliating. Right? So I would have to beat him in other ways. So, like, I would go tell people he's gay and things like that. And I would say, man, he had like a 12 or 13-year-old sister who came to visit him one day, and I saw her in there. I said some nasty things about his sister, anything to get him mad. As soon as he would get mad at me, I would say, look at you. You call yourself a Christian, getting mad at me. I don't want your religion, right? So I'm sure you've met people like that before. But apart from me getting him mad at certain points, we would be friends, and one interesting thing that happened was Randy liked to fast. And when I say fast, I watched him go 7 days on nothing but water, and I know because he gave me all his meal trays. And I asked him why, and he said, well, when he's out, he'll never have an opportunity to do long-term fasting because you need energy and so on if you're working and so on. So he was taking advantage of this opportunity to do long-term fasting when he's in a dorm and has that opportunity. So I was still trying to find a way to beat the Christians, so I decided to go 10 days. Right? So I'd never fasted at all in my life, but I went 10 days on nothing but water just to beat this Christian. And then I ate for a week, and I went another 10 days just to rub it in. So we kept going back and forth, and whatever he would do, I would do like 2 or 3 days more than he did. Now, he noticed this. He wasn't trying to compete with me or anything, but he noticed, hey, how come every time I fast, you go 2 or 3 days more? And I was going, no, it's just coincidence that it's turning out like that. Eventually, Randy went 40 days. Told me Jesus had done it. He went 32 days on nothing but water, and then he started drinking like Kool-Aid and so on to prepare his body for food. And then he didn't eat until he was finished with the 40 days. He said, all right, I'm going 42. I beat you and Jesus. So on my 11th day, I passed out in front of a guard, right? Landed on my head right in front of a guard. One of the other inmates, a guy named Jeff, he said, yeah, you were walking up, and all of a sudden it looked like you were a snake standing on its tail. And you were moving like that, and then boom, you went straight down. Anyway, they put me in a camera cell because they looked at my mental health history. They thought I was trying to starve myself to death. Like that's the best way I could come up with of killing myself is slowly starving myself to death, right? I mean, think about it. I'm trying to beat the Christian. They think I'm trying to kill myself, right? So they put me back in this camera cell where they had me on camera all day. And I thought, fine, I'm back here. Now I have no distractions. I can sit here. I can read all these books. I can learn all the information. Because the only thing I could come up with as far as why Randy kept beating me was that he'd studied things that I hadn't studied. So he just had an advantage in information. So if I just studied the same things, then I'll get back out, we'll go, and I'll be able to show him that I'm right and he's wrong, and I win, ultimately. So I started studying back there. And I'd been studying some just based on things that he told me. I would start reading them. But now I just had all day, because now you're not playing cards or doing anything else. So got sets of Bible studies from the chaplain. Had a bunch of interesting apologetics books from Randy, mainly focusing on the Bible and the Gospels and trying to make sense of all this. And so I was back there, and as far as how much fasting I'd done, I'm about 260 pounds right now. So I've got a belly, but around 230 I don't have a belly. So 30 pounds less, I don't have a belly at all. But I got to under 150 pounds just through fasting, trying to be a Christian. And 150 pounds for a normal person of normal height and so on would be fine. I looked horrible. My skin turned yellow. I remember they took me to the doctor one day to check my blood pressure and so on. Not only did the blood pressure thing they put on my finger say that I was dead, they were trying to send me away because they thought I was the wrong person. They're like, this is not him. Look, here's a picture, it's not him. They had the picture when I came in there, and I just looked like a completely different person by then. But so I was back there and was reading and trying to make sense of this all. And slowly, after a couple months, certain things started to bother me. And one was I finally understood what's called the design argument. I didn't know that's what it was called. But I was sitting in the cell, and I was looking around. I was just looking at the bricks stacked up on top of each other. The bricks and the bars and so on, and I thought, if someone told me that these bricks came together in this order just to form something like a cell, by natural means that didn't involve intelligence, I would smack that person in the mouth for saying something so stupid. And that's just bricks. You don't get much simpler than stacking bricks on top of each other. But I realized I would never in a million years believe that bricks came together in a certain order to form this little cell by natural means. So why, in the name of common sense, did I believe life, the simplest living cell, is vastly more sophisticated and complicated than bricks stacked on top of each other? The simplest living cell is like a miniature city in terms of what's being done inside of it, in terms of all the little things that are going on inside of the cell. It's like a miniature little city. And how could I just believe, without questioning it, without bothering to investigate it, that something like that could happen on its own? So that didn't convince me that God existed or anything like that, but it started bothering me that, because keep in mind, I spent years trying to sort of cleanse myself from the brainwashing that had taken place, but it was mostly moral things. I have to get rid of all these moral rules you've imposed on me. But I had all these beliefs that I'd gotten from the same people, and I never thought to question those things. So that started bothering me, that I had come to that belief without ever questioning it, when now it started to seem absurd. The next thing that bothered me was Randy had told me how the apostles died, how the apostles of Jesus died. And basically they went to their horrible bloody deaths proclaiming that Jesus had risen from the dead and appeared to them. And so I started looking at like Fox's Book of Martyrs and so on their deaths. And the reason that started bothering me was for years I thought that I'd figured out Christianity and could explain the origin of Christianity. And what I believed was Jesus was a guy who claimed to be the Messiah. He had followers. His followers believed in him. He died. He was put to death. And they wanted to keep the movement going, so they invented a bunch of stories about him rising from the dead in order to keep the movement going. And that made sense to me, right? You want to keep the movement going, invent a story about a guy rising from the dead. That'll work. And obviously it did work, because here you have Christianity. Now, what was the problem with that? Well, if those same guys then go to a bunch of horrible bloody deaths for claiming that that is true, I tried to think of one other person in all of history who died for something that he knew he made up. And I couldn't come up with one person in all of history. Lots of people die for something that's not true, but people don't die for something they know they made up. And even if you got one weirdo who's willing to die for something he made up, the idea that all of your followers would be willing to go out and die horrible bloody deaths, getting tortured and crucified and so on, for something that's not true, that seemed absurd. Like, what are the odds that this guy had all the weirdest followers in all of history? And keep in mind, it wasn't just his followers, right? You have like the Apostle Paul, claimed the same thing. I saw him risen from the dead too. And that was a guy who started off by killing Christians. That was not his follower. His brother James was Jesus' half-brother, but was not one of his followers. He thought his brother was crazy or something. And he started preaching Christianity. So what did these guys see? Well, they claimed that they had seen a man risen from the dead. So, when someone dies for what they're claiming, that doesn't tell me that what they're claiming is true, but it tells me that they really believe it. So my explanation for Christianity, these guys invented a story. That didn't work anymore. Now think about this. If you take, let's say, terrorists crashing planes into buildings, that doesn't tell me that what they believe in is true, but it tells me they sincerely believe it. And so if you think about, hey, how did those terrorists who crashed these planes into buildings, how did they conclude that their belief is true? Well, they heard the message preached by someone else, and they believed it, and they thought it made sense, and so they were willing to die for it because they believed it with such a high level of confidence. The apostles were not dying for some message about Jesus that they'd heard. They were dying for something they saw, right? That's a difference. Right? This is not, hey, we heard a message, we really believe it, and we're ready to go out and die for it. This was, we saw this guy, and we're ready to die for that claim. And so, this is a different situation. So now I have to figure out, how do you explain this? How do you explain that willingness to die? And the only explanation I could come up with for why a bunch of people who knew a guy all concluded that after he was brutally executed, he was alive again later and talking to them. The only explanation I could come up with is that they really believed it. And the only explanation I could come up with for why they really believed it was they actually saw him, right? You can't say something like they were all hallucinating. If you're hallucinating that I'm here right now, other people aren't going to see it. Because a hallucination by definition is like something in your own mind. So if all these guys are seeing the same thing, that means they're seeing something that's there. What are they seeing? I couldn't think of anything other than they actually saw the guy that they knew was already dead. So now it looks like you start getting a miracle on your hands. And if anyone in all of history has God's stamp of approval, it would seem like the guy who rose from the dead, right? After making the kinds of claims that he made. So started thinking, well, if I'm going to listen to anyone, it would probably be that guy. And so that started bothering me. And the third thing that started bothering me was you may have noticed a little contradiction in my beliefs. I didn't draw attention to it, but it was there. It was there all along. I'd mentioned that I started believing that I'm like the new stage of evolution, and I'm like humanity 2.0. I'm the best, and so I didn't have to follow the rules that everyone else had and so on. But I also believe that we're insignificant blobs of cells on a meaningless speck of dust going around a meaningless, pointless star in a huge universe. Now, those things don't go together very well. It makes no sense to say, hey, I'm the new and improved 2.0 meaningless blob of cells. Who cares what we do? Doesn't make any sense. So that started bothering me, and I realized in order for me to be the best, most important thing, there has to be some kind of like standard of what's best and most important. If it's all just meaningless nonsense, then I'm not better than anything else. I'm just different. So in order for me to be the best and greatest, there has to be some standard. But if there's a standard, I mean, it seems like it would be something else, right? Like if there actually is a standard, it seems like someone like Jesus would be better than me in terms of what he's doing. And that's when it started finally hitting me like, oh my goodness, look at myself. If there's any sort of moral standard of right and wrong, if I'm not inventing it, what are the odds that I'm matching up to it? I mean, I'm sitting in a cell for trying to murder my dad with a hammer just because. I'm back here right now because I won't eat because I'm obsessed with beating a Christian at something. And I'm starving to death even though they bring me food every day. And my skin's yellow. I can't stand up without falling over. I'm like the most pathetic person in the world. And so in a very short period of time, I went from thinking that I'm the greatest, most advanced person in the world to thinking I'm the most pathetic loser in the entire world. And that's actually a very important transition, because if you think you're the greatest, most important thing in the world, what do you need to change about yourself? But if you think you're the most pathetic, worst human being in the world, wow, then you're about 2 steps away from becoming a Christian. Because if you're really that messed up and you're thinking, this is just how I am, right? This is what I am. I'm just by nature, I am really, really messed up and pathetic. What chance do I have for fixing anything? What chance do I have for anything? I see where I got myself here. Then you start thinking, okay, I am absolutely pathetic and helpless. But then you start thinking, okay, well, there are 2 options here. Either I'm messed up and mentally deranged and pathetic, and that's just the way things are, or there's someone out there who can help people like me. And when you ask that question, when you say, all right, who in all of history, who had the ability to take really messed up people and give them a new life just like that? You get a list of 1. It ain't Muhammad. Go through all the Muslim sources. Show me someone like that. Show me something that Muhammad did like that. You look at Jesus, that happened over and over and over again, right? Read the story of Legion. The guy who sits there cutting himself inside a tomb and so on, right? Jesus, done, fixed. So it was basically, I wasn't completely convinced that it was true, but it was like, well, it's that or it's nothing, right? So started thinking, what if I pray and it turns out to be wrong? It's not like I'm getting any worse. So what happens if I just, all right, I'm going to go ahead and pray, and what if I find out later there's a bunch of nonsense? Well, then I'm just back in the same boat I was already in, right? So it's better off to just go ahead and give it a try here, because come to think, well, there are certain things that make it look like it's true. So I basically thought, hey, what have I got to lose here? So I bowed down on my bunk, and I said, God, I don't know if I'm going to believe in you tomorrow, but I'll believe in you right now. And if you can do anything with me, you are welcome to it. And then I prayed, with the Bible studies that came, and it would have things like the sinner's prayer and things like that. So I put together a prayer the best I could. And so I sat up from that prayer. And people talk about, feeling a weight lifted off them or something like that. I don't trust feelings entirely. Josh McDowell said when he became a Christian, he said he felt like he was going to throw up. So, don't trust your feelings too much. Feelings are too weird. But in case anyone's interested, I felt like I had been fighting. When I sat up from that prayer, I felt like I had been fighting. And I don't mean metaphorically. I felt like I had been just physically fighting nonstop for 20 straight years, and that it all just stopped. It all just stopped, and I sat down. That was the feeling. So I was in jail at that point. I still had years to serve in prison, but I spent those years sometimes 4 to 6 hours a day and so on, studying the Bible and Christian books and so on. And it was really weird because for years I still felt like I'm the most horrible pathetic person in the world, but I know Jesus, so I'm just gonna keep going. But it got to the point where it was weird because people started thinking I'm like a good dude. That was really weird, because when I went to my second mental hospital, I was just running my mouth one day. It was I was in the mental hospital, just to give you a time frame, on the day of the OJ verdict. And I was there in a room full of mental patients, and I'm sitting there walking back and forth going, I hope he did do it, and I hope he gets away with it, right? And people are going, what the heck is wrong with you, right? And like even mental patients are like, what's wrong with you? And I remember I was talking to an administrator, and I was just telling him what I thought about things, because what are they going to do? I'm in a mental hospital. So I'm just talking about, and this is like one of the administrators of the mental hospital, and he goes, man, if you actually think like that, you are in the right place right now, and you need to stay here. And so that's what I thought about myself for years, like I am that really messed up person. And then one day, years later, still in prison, I was walking by, and this guy named Floyd, who would sweep the floor, an inmate who would sweep the floor, he said, he goes, Wood, me and some of the other guys are trying to figure out what someone like you did to get in here. And here's what we're thinking. We're thinking you're walking down the street with your girlfriend, and some guy disrespected her, and you had to defend her honor, you hit the man, and you got locked up for hitting him. And I go, wait, you think I could only get locked up for doing something good because I'm so noble? So that was like really, really weird. That's when it hit me, like, whoa, people think I'm nice now. And so that was really, really, really awesome change. So a little while after that, I got out and went straight to college, and just to bring everyone up to date, went to college and started off in college, and there I met a guy named Nabil Qureshi, and was in there with Nabil Qureshi, and we met in a hotel room. We were on a school trip. We were on the speech and debate team, and we were sharing a hotel room, and he was a Muslim, and I was over there reading my Bible. I was reading through the Bible in a year, and I was in Isaiah at this time. So I'm reading, and I see Nabil over there. He's like putting away his prayer rug, and I'm praying, and I say, God, I don't want people to call me like a bigot or something like this for starting an argument with a Muslim. So if you want me to talk to this guy, let him start it. And right after that, Nabil said, so are you a hardcore Christian? And I said, yes, I am. And so that started things off, and Nabil and I became best friends really quickly, and we would sometimes just stay up all night arguing about Christian and Muslim topics. And eventually Nabil and I were in an airport one day. We were arguing about the resurrection. And as we were arguing about the resurrection, this new girl came up to us and said, you're both right. And Nabil and I both turned to her like, what in the name of common sense are you talking about? I'm saying he rose from the dead. Nabil's saying he didn't rise from the dead. Those are the only two possibilities. One of us has to be right. The other has to be wrong. What do you mean you're both right? And what she meant was, all religious beliefs are basically the same. If if it makes you feel good, then it's true for you. That's fine. So she was actually an agnostic, but like a nice agnostic of, have your religious beliefs, that's fine. So we got into an argument, and she was really mean. She's one of those people where she would make her point, and if you started responding, then she would start laughing at you, which made it difficult. So it was really fun. Anyway, we liked arguing so much that we got married. And I bring that up because some of you young men in here, apologetics can help you get ladies. This young woman was everything I wanted except Christian. What do you do there? Oh, I guess I'll give up. Wrong. Got some books for you to read, girl. And it was awesome because she would do it. I would hand her a book. She would come back the next day ready to argue about it and so on. She made it through 5 books, and then she became a Christian. So it was cool because then it was me and her versus Nabil. And then Nabil and I had another friend named Zach. He was like a Buddhist and so on. And then he converted to Christianity. It was 3-on-1. Anyway, Nabil took about 4 years till he became a Christian. And the reason that's significant is there were Christians during this time saying, David, you're wasting your time. You have spent 4 years talking to this dude. His heart is clearly hard. His heart is clearly hard. He is in rebellion. And I'm like, well, no, if he keeps coming back, then, I don't know. Seems like the Spirit's drawing him, right? If he gets crushed in an argument and then comes back, why does he keep coming back, right? I believe God's drawing him. So I just kept going. I kept going with that as my method. And that got scary because for the first, I don't know, 2.5 years, we were focusing on Christian topics, the reliability of the New Testament, the deity of Christ, Jesus' death and resurrection. And then we started looking at the Quran and the life of Muhammad, and it seemed like he was getting like further away. It seemed like he was becoming a more ardent, more faithful Muslim during that time, which can be very discouraging. If you ever see that, just know that's natural. It's natural once people start having doubts to try and force themselves to become more devout, right? So if you see them becoming more devout, just keep in mind that may be because they're having an internal struggle and they're trying to compensate for that. So Nabil, after all these years, started having dreams and visions telling him to become a Christian. And then he did, and I thought, cool, I'm done with Islam. Because the only reason I was studying Islam was that my best friend was a Muslim. If he'd been something else, I would have been studying that. It's a good principle, by the way. It's a good principle, right? If you know someone who's something else, it should be in your mind. Hey, maybe I'm here, maybe I know this person because God is sovereign and I'm the right person to talk to this person, so I better start learning how to talk to this person. I had always thought like that. I was like, who else that I have ever met in prison enraged me like Randy to want to attack Christianity so much that I went and studied it and then became a Christian. I believe all of that. I believe all of that was planned. So with Nabil, come on, I ended up in the hotel room with this guy, and then we become best friends. You can't tell me, oh, he's too hard-hearted. So anyway, Nabil became a Christian. I thought he was done. I thought I was done with Islam. I was more interested in dealing with the arguments and objections of atheists. And then somewhere along the line, watching Nabil and the stand he took as people came against him and he started getting death threats, I realized, wow, Muslims make really cool Christians. And the reason they make cool Christians is it's very easy for lots of people in the West to convert. Like I became a Christian. Most of my family, my grandma aside, who was a Christian, most of my family, if I told them I'd become a Martian Buddhist or something like that, they wouldn't have cared as long as I'm being good and staying out of trouble. That was it. That was their criterion. So they didn't really care if I'd become a Christian. But with a Muslim, that's kind of a big deal. Kind of a big deal if you leave Islam. And Muslims, basically, there are these three huge obstacles in their way. One, they're told all their lives that the unforgivable sin, the worst possible sin, is shirk, or associating a partner with Allah. So if you say Jesus is Lord, you've just committed the worst possible sin. So that's one. Two, they understand that they're likely going to have to give up their family. That their family might shun them if they leave Islam. And three, the penalty, according to Muhammad, for leaving Islam is death. Muhammad said, if anyone leaves this Islamic religion, kill him. So we preach the good news. We preach the good news. What a Muslim is hearing when we preach the good news is, hey, you need to believe this thing that will cause you to lose your entire family and maybe one day get your head chopped off and then you're going to hell. It's like, wait, you call that the good news? Because it sounds like the worst news anyone ever came up with ever, right? That's what they're hearing. So it can take a long time to get through all that. But there's a flip side to it. The flip side is when someone says, when a Muslim finally recognizes, you know what, I may have to give up my family, and I may eventually get killed, and I've been taught all my life this is a one-way ticket to hell, but you know what, I don't care, I want to know Jesus. That's someone who will lay down his life for Jesus Christ, right? That's why they make really powerful Christians. And there are all kinds of people in different situations from different backgrounds who make awesome Christians, but in different ways. And so, if you think me and Nabil and others, all the different situations we're in, but it makes different people, everyone in here, equipped for different things and interacting with different kinds of people. But I just wanted to say, I didn't want to conclude here with anything about myself or anything about Nabil. I wanted to conclude with something about Randy. Right, Randy, the Christian that I was talking to. Randy became a Christian with one of those tent revivals. There was a tent in his town with someone preaching and stuff. He went to it, became a Christian. spent some time thinking about the things that he had done, decided, you know what, I'm not just going to ignore the things I've done all my life. I'm actually going to go turn myself in for these things. He goes in there, finds out he's going to be locked up for a really long time, and thinking, wow, did I really make the right decision here? And if you look at the chain of events of things that he set in motion with that act of faithfulness right there, right? I mean, think how many people were impacted by Nabil and his books and his ministry. That's worldwide. That's worldwide. You trace that back, it goes back to Randy converting in a tent revival and learning some basic apologetics. And so here's what's interesting. Randy was not a brilliant scholar, but he figured out why he believed. He figured out why he believed in God, and he figured out why he believed in Jesus, and he was able to communicate that. And that is what we're commanded in 1 Peter 3:15. We're commanded to be able to defend the hope that we have. And I will say, if Christians in general would learn that and obey that command, honor that command, I really think that's what's missing in the church today. Right? In the first century, apologetics was built into Christianity. You're not going to lose your family, have your Jewish family turn their backs on you because you're becoming a Christian, or convert and be thrown to lions later and so on. You're not going to do that unless you think you have a really good reason to be a Christian. So part of the emphasis was always know why you believe and be able to share that. And that's why Christianity spread so fast. It spread so far, so fast. Christianity, in about 3 centuries, conquered the Roman Empire, the most powerful empire that the world had ever seen, and did it without shedding a drop of blood. Later people did, because now you had a Roman-Christian hybrid and so on. But during those first 3 centuries, when Christianity was going through this rapid growth, never killed anyone. It spread like crazy in spite of the persecution. Why? Because they knew why they believed, and they were able to share that. So that is what we want to do. And the speakers here for this conference are going to share a lot of information that they have found very helpful in a variety of circumstances. And if you learn if you learn what's going to be helpful when talking to different kinds of people, you're going to be able to help a lot of people. And keep in mind, a lot of the people that you might help really need help, right? There were people like me who really needed some help. And it would have been very easy for someone like Randy to say, man, this guy's a jerk. I'm not talking to him. He talks about my sister. He tells people I'm gay. Why am I going to talk to him? Would have been very easy to do that, but he stuck with me. Later, I stick with Nabil for years. So you learn the apologetics, and look at who God puts in front of you. I guarantee you there's going to be a matchup. It's going to be a matchup with the people you encounter and the things you've learned, because what you've learned is going to be for certain kinds of people. So, Andrew?